We began trying the groping thing the next night. Her breasts were always the worst. We didn't get past the cookies before we got tired and went to bed. I was afraid it would make her frustrated, but I could see her having faith in the technique as we nuzzled each other sweetly and drifted to sleep. We pushed on night after night. I'd always stop kissing her to do it so she could say the safe word. I began rubbing her sides to relax her instead of her arms. It seemed to be more effective. Then I'd raise her peaks from her stomach to her throat. It always took so long that there would never be a full grope by the time we went to sleep. I was almost happy for it. I was scared shitless that once I started groping her in my bed, I'd lose my self-control and let her set the pace. And my girl was fucking impatient as hell. And every morning, I would spend longer and longer in the shower to relieve all that sexual tension that I had allowed to build in the bed the previous night. Really, I didn't mind going so goddamn slow. In fact, I much preferred it. It felt like I was doing something the right way for once. Doing right by my girl. It made the painful throbbing erections worth it. And every day I stepped out of the shower and saw her little Bluetooth brush next to mine, I would smile like a fucking idiot. School always pushed us to the edge every day. Walking through the halls with all the people, and holding my girl to me tightly as we weaved around them. She would keep her cheek pressed into my side as she stared at the floor. I wanted her to hold her fucking chin up and look them all in the eye. But she couldn't. So I did it for her. And I was usually glad she wasn't looking up and seeing them, because some of the looks I got were utterly fucking ridiculous. I spot Stanley every day before Bella's gym class glaring daggers at her as she walked in the doors. It made my fists clench. Lunch became progressively more interesting. It all started that first week when Jess began talking about a book that Bella had read. Some fucking historical biography, or some shit. It perked her interest as she caressed mine and offered her opinion of it timidly. And they began talking about it while we all ate our cookies and I had my arm around her. It was the first time we had spoken to anyone else at the lunch table. Somehow, Rosalie entered into the conversation, shocking us all more than a little with her intellect on the subject. She rolled her eyes and flicked her blonde hair back while leaning across the table and chatting to my girl about it some more. I stayed silent as I stroked her neck and listened to the conversation. She was quiet and timid as fuck, but she talked nonetheless. Emmett and Jez were getting along more than I thought possible, telling crude jokes to each other and laughing some days, while Rose and Brandon rolled their eyes in exasperation. Bella and I would just caress each other softly and occasionally snicker at the jokes. I wanted her to offer them the filthy nun joke, but I knew she would just blush and hide under my jacket. It grew even more interesting into second week. Brandon was talking about a new band that she loved while we all sat at the table and ate our cookies, sitting next to Jez and noting over the music like it was the next coming of Christ or some shit. I fucking hated it. So I snorted at her. Jez watched in amusement as I thoroughly insulted the band she loved so much. She just turned to face me with an arched eyebrow.
"So tell me, oh master of all things musical,"
she said to me dryly from across the table, earning her an eye roll as I stroked my girl's neck. Bella sighed and shook her head while slumping further into my side as Brandon continued.
"What is acceptable music to someone like you?"
she asked with air quotations. Jez and my girl simultaneously groaned as I smirked at her cockily. That smirk began the longest conversation I've ever had with Brandon. I told her what I felt was acceptable music, and much to surprise she told me her idea of acceptable music. Her musical taste wasn't all shitty, but she has some skeletons in her iPod closet. Everyone at the table looked at us in shock when we actually agreed on something we both liked. And by the end of the hour, Brandon wasn't glaring at me anymore. It didn't make us eternal BFFs, or any shit like that. But she did smile wryly at me as she walked to class hand in hand with Jez. Bella was so goddamn happy about the two of us getting along that she smiled all through bio, even though our assignments were on flesh-eating bacteria. I made a silent promise to myself to try harder with Brandon if it was going to make her happy like that. There were some nights we didn't just attack each other like two hormonal teenage motherfuckers. Some nights were darkened by the reality of our ghosts. One particular evening, I was with Carlisle in his study playing a very humiliating game of chess. And he brought up my mother. Really fucking subtly. Completely out of the blue, just sitting in front of the chessboard across from me and trying to guess her age with a cautious glance in my direction from under his lashes, as he took my rook. And just like always when someone brought up shit like that, the memories came. Even though I tried my hardest to swallow them down and let them go, they still possessed my mind and made me clench my fists. I just stood up and walked out of the room, pissed off, and refusing to speak with him about something like that. That one little mention ruined my entire night. I think Bella knew as soon as I opened the door that I was off. I ate quietly, waiting to get my sketchbook out and lay one particular memory down on paper to get it out of my fucking head for 2 minutes. But instead, she made me lay down facing her as she stroked my hair softly. It made me sigh. She began asking me questions about those memories that I tried so hard to keep away. Something about the way she held me and whispered to me made me open up completely to her, tell her shit that I couldn't even think about during the day around other people. Shit that took me back years in time to a little house in Chicago. I wanted to be pissed at her for asking me those things, and forcing them out of my head with her silky voice and mesmerizingly loving brown eyes. But I couldn't. Because telling her was even better than just drawing them, and when I woke up the next morning, I could focus again. Just like me, sometimes my girl was having a shitty day too. It was always so fucking obvious to me when she walked in with a blatantly forced smile. She would grow quiet and withdrawn as I ate my meal, and soul-concerned sideways glances at her as she leaned against my shoulder. Afterwards, I'd just pull her into my lap and hug her, begging her softly to tell me what was wrong. She usually did. One particular time, it was something small that confused the shit out of me, how she had to say no to Brandon when she was asked to go shopping. One other night, it was something far more obvious. She told me she had seen Esme and Brandon lying on the couch together reminiscing about Brandon's childhood. She agonizingly declared it a mother and daughter moment. And I could sympathize with her so fucking completely. That was the biggest reason I rarely went to Jazz's house. He and his mother were always very close. My girl cried that night. It broke my fucking heart as I rubbed her back soothingly and rocked her in my lap. Usually it was the bitterness of her condition, or an episode, that made her cry. I had rarely ever seen her cry over that particular thing. She wept silently on my shoulder for over an hour as I held her. We could just tell when we needed a night to live the reality of our existences. Just a few fucking hours to wallow in the darkness, and allow it to spill over. It was a weird kind of intuition. Those dark nights always made the following nights brighter though. Because all that shit was out and gone, and we could just be together without thinking about it. We could smile and laugh again as I ate my meal. And afterwards, we'd eagerly continue where we left off with the desensitization process. On the 12th night there was progress. We were making out, like always, as she hitched her leg over my hip. I had been quite shamelessly groping her ass as she licked and sucked my neck, making my groan into hers. I had the most overwhelming urge to roll her onto her back. Instead, I decided to roll onto mine, bringing her on top of me as our lips met again. It was the first time we had changed positions from our sides. She moaned breathlessly, pressing herself against me and grinding against my erection with a gasp into my mouth. I groaned, and grabbed her ass tighter, only mildly encouraging the act as she did it once again. It was fucking sexy. But after a few moments of battling with each other's tongues, I sat us up, breaking from her lips panting, and beginning my attempts at touching her breasts as she weaved her fingers through my hair and licked her lips. There was rubbing and caressing and so much relaxing that she rested her forehead on mine and closed her eyes as I began grazing her peaks. That was the first night I was able to do it. There were 2 cookies. We usually got to 4 before we got too tired to continue. I let my hands remain motionless on her breasts with the last successful attempt. She still had her forehead resting on mine when the corners of her lips turned up into a smile of triumph and she finally opened her eyes to gaze at me. She crushed her lips